Hello and welcome to our latest episode of Security Noise. Oops, I clicked it again. Business Email Compromise Explained. Today we have Olivia Kate and Rocky Brockway to join us for a discussion on business email compromise and how it impacts organizations. They bring a good deal of expertise to this discussion via their experience in incident response and consulting on policy and maturity. But before we begin, I do want to mention our Discord server. You can go to discord.gg/trustedsec to join. As far as information security, in case you missed it this week, building on our primary discussion of Chinese supply chain issues, the ESP32 microcontroller, which is found in a wide variety of IoT products and smaller electronic devices and is often used to provide Bluetooth and Wi-Fi support, was revealed to have a range of issues on what the vendor describes as debugging commands that will be removed. The extension allowed Bluetooth interfaces to be used to do attacks such as MAC cloning and impersonation, as well as packet injection. Generally, these supply chain attacks require malicious firmware be placed on the device, or a compromised device would be needed to be shipped into your site. However, the vulnerability can be leveraged to gain persistence as well. Expressive did say that it will disable the debug controls in future firmware, and that there really wasn't anything here that was to be part of any sort of intentional backdoor. Of course, we'll leave that statement for what it is, but if you have one of these devices, you might want to take a peek and make sure that it's got current firmware from the vendor that released the actual product, and make sure that it's somewhere on your network where it won't be leveraged for a foothold. With that out of the way, I do want to mention I am your host, Jeff Walton. I lead our application security team at TrustedSec. I've got my producer, Skylar Tudor, here to join us in the discussion, as well as to make sure the show sounds great. And I want to give Rocky and Olivia both a moment to introduce themselves again and say hello.
Okay, my name is Olivia Kate. I am part of the incident response team here at TrustedSec. I've been on the team for about 3 years now, and we get to work a variety of different cybersecurity incidents for our clients and customers. And lately we've seen a big uptick in business email compromises, so we've got a lot of insights from the cases we've worked there.
And I am Rocky Brockway. I'm the Director of Advisory Innovations at TrustedSec. And I help out, occasionally from board presentation perspective with IR tabletops and other presentations around incident response. So great to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for taking the time to join the show today. So for our main topic, I want to talk about business email compromise. One of the things that information security practitioners look forward to almost every year, I guess that's the right thing, look forward to, I don't know, is Verizon's data breach investigations report. A trend that's noted for years now has been that better than 2/3 of all breaches have included some sort of social engineering attack. Among the most common of these is phishing, or some variant that includes targeted attacks such as spear phishing or whaling, or some sort of insider type threat. One bit of good news is the report showed that a large portion of stolen assets are often recovered, but these attacks, when successful, are costly and often result in upwards of losses ranging around $50,000 and more. And that can certainly be devastating for smaller businesses. The basic pattern usually goes something like this. A fraudster poses as a trusted contact or a potentially lucrative client. They start by asking for something that might be a legitimate request, but usually don't include enough information to fulfill it, either because they don't actually possess that information or possibly to simply increase a sense of urgency and to spread the interaction out across time so the victim may forget what steps they have taken or not taken to authenticate the request. And the fraudster, then having established a back and forth with the victim, either induces them to reveal sensitive information, such as banking details needed to create a transaction, or attempts to get them to take some sort of action, such as modifying account roles or performing a wire transfer, shipping products, etc. Olivia, Rocky, have I missed any fundamental points there?
I think you've really covered the basic flow of what we see with business email compromise attacks. We've, of course, seen those types of tactics quite a bit lately, but we've also seen a big increase of just straight credential harvesting campaigns as well. That's a key tactic for initial access we've been seeing lately. Attackers will set up pretty realistic looking pages that mimic the look of legit logon pages for platforms like Microsoft 365. That's a common one. And a lot of times in these attacks, the threat actors won't even do anything interesting as far as sending out additional messages to phish more users, but they'll just hop over to OneDrive and SharePoint to start exfiltrating sensitive data. And one more, along with attackers posing as like trusted individuals, contacts, and vendors, a lot of the times they also use spoofed or lookalike domains that closely mimic a legitimate domain to make their emails appear more credible.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, the one thing that I would maybe add is there are kind of two main styles of these types of attacks. One is where the adversary has access to, let's say, a breached email account. And that could be a part, let's say a third party partner or vendor, or even an internal breached email account that then, some of the social engineering tactics like urgency and familiarity can then be taken advantage of for nefarious purposes. The other is then, the opposite of that, where the attacker doesn't have access to a breached email account and has to rely more on the standard social engineering, let's say the misspelled domains and being able to trick users doing something that they eventually will regret, right?
So I want to react to something Olivia said, specifically around cloning the Microsoft login, going after things like SharePoint directly. Has the fact that so many organizations have moved to these cloud platforms and software as a service models where all this stuff is exposed, has that changed kind of the patterns, practices, tactics that attackers are using around email compromise?
I think so. I mean, a lot of our customers and clients do use the email service with Microsoft 365. So it makes it a lot more likely that an attacker sending a campaign with a spoofed page appearing like Microsoft 365 will actually get the user to interact with it. So they have a much higher chance with a lot of these big corporations hosting these software platforms of hooking users in that way.
Okay. So it is more about maybe gaining more access to technical resources immediately in other IT systems than perhaps trying to get someone to do that wire transfer or something like it was in the past.
I'd say it's about half and half, honestly. A lot of times we see attackers just going after data and exfiltrating things from like SharePoint and OneDrive. And a lot of times we do still see attackers trying to coerce people into sending wire transfers. It's almost 50-50, honestly.
What do victims look like today? Is it typically smaller organizations with maybe less formal IT, perhaps not as much policy and separation of duties in place? Or is it larger organizations where you've got more remote workers, maybe coworkers aren't as familiar with each other, they don't know everybody in the organization? What's that shaping up for these days?
One of the things that I've noticed is in many instances that's directly tied to how much could potentially be stolen, and that there are different business models for some of these different adversarial threat groups, right? Some may be looking for that large haul. Others may be very, very comfortable with lots and lots of smaller hauls, right? But, at the end of the day, it's primarily that financially motivated, generally opportunistic threat group that obviously is looking for profit. All of this is a business. They have return on investment and things of that nature. But it's really, in my opinion, really good, a kind of thing to have in your back pocket to understand what are those motivating factors of adversaries that might be looking to potentially steal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the important thing to realize is that really anyone, no matter your size of organization, is at risk, unfortunately, with these types of attacks.
So knowing what assets are likely to be targets, whether they're human assets or whether they're financial assets or systems is good. But assuming that, like most IT security incidents, this is probably going to happen to you eventually in some way. From the incident response side, what are some things that companies did that worked really well, maybe allowed them to mitigate the damage, maybe allowed them to recover whatever was lost? And what are some things that maybe you've seen that prevented responding in a useful way?
I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the technical controls here in a bit, but some more procedural ones that we see being successful a lot of times is one, having clear escalation protocols and procedures laid out, having a policy where employees are encouraged to escalate anything suspicious in their email to security or IT teams before taking action. That's been a game changer that helps to mitigate human error quite a bit. And if someone does click on something or takes actions with a suspicious email and realizes after the fact, to make sure that they really feel comfortable escalating those as quickly as possible and that they know how to. A lot of the times, if people wait too long, then those funds are not eligible to be refunded or recovered anymore. Verification processes are also really important. Implementing a second factor of authentication for any financial transactions in particular, like requiring a phone call or in-person verification for wire transfers, is very important too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The multiple approvals on wire transfers is a very, very important one. Separation of duties is also really important from the perspective that if you can minimize, let's say, a person's role, let's say they're in purchasing, right, and can create a purchase order, but they're also in accounts receivable, so then they could potentially just go ahead and cut a check to a fake company. If this is an insider threat, then reducing that attack surface, from the team via separation of duties is also a pretty great idea.
So a lot of the traditional financial controls then, which is probably too big a subject for us to really cover on an IT security show. But like you mentioned, not having the same person actually be able to create that pick ticket as issue the PO so that there are multiple approvers and things like that probably prevent us from making errors and shipping product that we shouldn't and things of that nature. Any specific incidents you can share from a incident recovery response scenario in terms of events? Obviously, you don't want to name any names, but just a war story or something would be great.
I mean, one that I can think about particularly from a recent case that we worked, the client that we were working with wasn't even compromised. And it was just a trusted vendor that was compromised. And they ended up wiring $4 million to an attacker, and they didn't realize for months. I can't remember what tipped them off, but they were able to discover this. And I think the vendor itself was wondering where their payment was and reached out to our client, and they figured out that it went to an attacker, and it was far too late to try to recover those funds, unfortunately. So that really goes back to anyone can be a victim. You really have to keep your eye out. And even if your organization isn't compromised, you can still fall victim to some sort of adjacent business email compromise, unfortunately.
One of the things that I suggest to organizations is, for example, in awareness training, we know, I get up our awareness training. We know that artificial intelligence is getting really, really good, and it's virtually impossible to get end users to recognize the tactic of recognizing AI attacks, right? That's almost impossible at this point. So kind of flip that around and educate the users. Well, here are the things that your IT team or your security team will never ask from you. You can apply that to this conversation from a financial team's perspective. Here are the things that the finance teams will never ask you to do if it's, your boss, the CFO, or whoever else. And that, again, will begin help kind of reducing or at least chipping away at that attack surface.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other strategies as far as making sure that org chart and stuff like that's available? I mean, we've had security awareness training forever, and I think you see different, depending on who you ask. I think you'll get different opinions on how useful your typical anti-phishing training is. I think certainly we're probably a little beyond don't click links in emails and and stuff like that being practically useful. So in terms of awareness training, then, you mentioned, maybe having that enumerated list of things that you'll never be asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
No one's ever going to ask you to purchase gift cards, that kind of thing. But other than that, any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there's always historically been a glaring problem with traditional security awareness training, which is generally the messaging is, hey, you're our employee. It's your responsibility to protect our data. And security awareness training itself is all about changing behavior, and that message doesn't change human behavior, right? So from a general training perspective, I like to make sure that the training is very personal, right? Here's a bunch of crazy examples of things that we've seen. Everything from really, really sophisticated phishing attacks to results of incidents and then response cleanup and everything else. However, here's 3 very, very simple things that can help protect you and your loved ones from all the crazy stuff that we've seen on the internet. And that actually changes behavior. And then the win-win part of this is that once you're successful actually changing behavior at that personal level, those changes filter back up into the business. So I really like that approach from an awareness, a security awareness training perspective.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Rocky, for sure. I mean, many security awareness programs unfortunately take kind of a one size fits all approach, which can result in a lot of basic material, even sometimes childish or like cartoon based material that a lot of adults aren't going to pay attention to. They don't have an incentive to, like you said, Rocky. And that's being delivered to employees at companies across the board, regardless of their role or experience level. And like you said, making sure to tailor that based on employees' roles, like to create custom training for different departments, job roles, or seniority levels to address specific risks that are more relevant to them. And phishing simulation, like the simulated targeted attacks that employees can go through to make sure that they're more prepared for real world situations, are really important too. But a lot of the times we see really basic examples used there too. So it's especially important to integrate real world current examples, such as like the QR code phishing or quishing, as people like to call it. But I just can't get behind that. I can't do it. And sometimes that even turns into making it sort of interactive and even like gamified. Using those interactive scenarios and like immersive simulations can help make it more engaging for employees to actually want to pay attention to and help the organization as a whole.
Is a social engineering simulation like that something that you would recommend to organizations of all stripes to do, or would you say that that's something that's for a higher maturity level after you've maybe done some basic stuff first?
I mean, I think it would be great for all organizations to be able to implement something like that. But for smaller organizations, that might unfortunately not be possible. There's a lot of tools out there. I think there's one through like KnowBe4 that has a lot of really great interactive content and phishing simulations and whatnot. But of course, that comes at a little bit of a higher price point. So I think smaller organizations should definitely think about implementing something like that, even if it's something that they create in-house, if they can't rely on one of those like bigger box solutions.
Well, how about technical controls then? Obviously email now is a very old protocol. It's been through a few generations, from bang paths all the way to, modern email addresses that we're used to now, and pretty much direct point-to-point relay. But for that reason, there's a lot of legacy stuff involved, and no one's ever quite been able to impose a, real security standard on it. There are things like DKIM and domain keys for validation. Certainly we can put MFA around the accounts themselves. You can't log into your mailbox without multi-factor authentication, and that's great. But should organizations be looking to maybe put some stricter controls and rules around, where we are making an important decision based on email, like it's got to be signed, and no, a domain signature isn't good enough. It needs to be, end to end from a client. And how do you train and disseminate that to people?
Sure. I mean, I like to follow the attack chain, right? The initial access, right? Email, we've got our DMARC, DKIM, SPF stuff there. That's all great. Multi-factor, absolutely 100%. I think those should be the basics. Those should be the absolute baseline. When we kind of look at beyond those types of controls, I mean, even something like being able to set up email encryption between third-party vendors, will likely reduce that attack surface if an email says it's from a third-party vendor, but it's not encrypted, right? Things like that can be done. I've seen organizations, looking at behavior analytics, UBA solutions, to really kind of alert on abnormal behavior from different accounts and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly a number of other things. I think, to Olivia's point earlier, though, there's only so much time in the day, and some organizations, smaller organizations, may not have the budget for some of these things.
And as far as like MFA goes, like Rocky said, that's now the basics. And there's still people that think that MFA is going to secure their account perfectly if they enable that. And I even run into clients that still don't have multi-factor authentication on accounts, which is crazy. But unfortunately, threat actors are one step ahead and have figured out pretty easy ways around multi-factor authentications. There's multiple toolboxes, like one called Evil Jinx, available publicly on the internet that can be leveraged. But there's a lot of things beyond that, like Rocky was saying, that you can use to help protect your email inboxes and tenants. A few other things that can be done, especially with a lot of clients and customers that we see using Microsoft 365, conditional access policies are available with some of the license levels. And there's some like impossible travel, risk-based access control, and blocking access from untrusted locations, just to name a few. Email filtering is very important. Like Rocky said, some of the behavioral based analytics, things like that, where you can implement content filters that check for known phishing patterns or fraudulent attachments. We see that a lot with Proofpoint and Mimecast being used. And then one more thing is domain monitoring, to make sure that you're monitoring for lookalike domains or potential domain spoofing that could be used in a BEC attack. And ZeroFox is a tool that I see often used for that in clients' environments.
I would also add this maybe from a non-technical control perspective, so to speak. I run into organizations and I try to at least suggest this, to have like a master list of vendor contacts, whether it's email, whether it's phone number, and when, let's say, one of these types of requests come in that could be a business email compromise, as long as it's like, meeting that criteria, the protocol should be, hold on, I'll call you back, or, I'll email you back, or whatever. All right. It's not going to be, that's certainly not going to be perfect, especially if the third party vendor's email has already been reached. But again, reduction of attack surfaces, part of the game. So
yeah, I mean, I guess my challenge is, I kind of wind the clock back to my days as a mail administrator, and being presented with some of these problems. It was maybe worse back then because more organizations couldn't do TLS over SMTP. Or rather SMTP over TLS, they couldn't do domain keys and things like that. But the end reality is you still had these vendors, you still had these clients that had these problems, and you weren't going to just reject all the email from them, right? You got to end up delivering that to your users. And it was a lot to try to put it on users to say, oh, look at the headers, was this thing signed? Are we doing better today? Or because from my perspective as primarily an email user now, it doesn't look like much has changed in that area.
That's a great question. Are we doing better today? Yeah, and I have a very similar background, Jeff. I don't know. I don't think we are. I think that the nature and kind of the way the protocol, I'm specifically talking about SMTP, but the way the protocol evolved, so to speak, from where it began, I think the complexities potentially outweigh some of the benefits of the newer features. And yeah, I kind of share your meh about, the state of email security today.
Well, it just seems like some of that stuff could be presented so much better in clients than it is.
Absolutely.
I mean, in Outlook, I've still got a mail gateway, even at our organization, where it identifies whether an email was external or not by modifying the subject and putting the word external in it, which is helpful, but also spoofable in ways. And you could send me, Rocky, an email that looks like it's external when it's not. I don't know why that would be useful, but you could do it. That's probably not good.
I'd find a way to be useful.
Yeah, you'd find a way.
And I feel like when you see so many of those, as we usually do, you kind of start to ignore them and not even realize that we're there.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
It's interesting that no one has really tackled that problem in a more useful, uniform way. I can remember a scenario where we were working with a vendor who we could tell from looking at message headers that somebody was in their email box, because some of the messages that were being sent to us, would come from a different path. And they would send, of course, what we sent back to them, back to us. And I could go back through the headers and kind of conclude that we didn't send it based on the signatures and things like that. But there were language barriers, and we couldn't really talk to this person easily because they were on the other side of the world. And we just were running into all sorts of problems trying to explain to them, look, dude, there is somebody who is reading your email. They have access to your mailbox. And it got to the point where I actually ended up printing a bunch of one-time pads, just sheets of randomly generated numbers. And I, created 2 copies. I handed one to our customer service person, and we put the other in a FedEx envelope. And we called them and said, look, you're going to use the next number in the subject line every email you send, and so are we. And if they don't line up, it's not real. And we could tell the attacker even tried to continue to, step into this and create fraudulent transactions for a while because they would send duplicate numbers and stuff like that. But they did ultimately give up. But I mean, it just seemed like such a ridiculous scenario, but it was the only way that, without totally cutting this person off, I could come up with to solve the problem.
That's pretty great. Victory by attrition.
Yeah. Skylar, Rocky, any stories like that might be fun before we wrap up?
I got nothing on my end for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Olivia's probably being in on the IR team probably has the majority of the really good stories. I usually am kind of coming in either at a more of a guidance strategy level than dealing with the actual technical weirdness and realities.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times what we see follows the same tactics and procedures, and sometimes it's gotten pretty mundane to investigate some of these BECs because I think attackers have realized they can keep doing the same simple things and still compromise mailboxes, unfortunately. One of the big tactics we see is attackers using inbox rules to route emails that they don't want the normal user to be seen to a different area. And sometimes we would see fun names for them, but now it's just gotten it's gotten boring, unfortunately, we're seeing just like dot, and then the next one is dot dot, the next one is just dot dot dot. It's unfortunate that a lot of the times I think these same simple tactics and procedures can get them into many mailboxes across different laterals and companies, and I think there's still a lot to be done in the business email world to help us better protect against these types of attacks.
Well, just to throw a wild grenade into the room here, what would it actually take to move beyond SMTP and to some other mail standard?
I think you would have to move worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so embedded. It is, HTTP and SMTP are the internet for all intents and purposes, and are the two pretty much the most common threat vector besides straight social engineering, maybe even not even straight social engineering. But
I mean, we've managed to upgrade HTTP protocols, though. I know some sites now that aren't even available unless you're using HTTP2.
Okay, but how long has SMTPS been around?
I hear you. This is why I find it interesting, because maybe 10 years ago you'd ask me, can we replace HTTP with a binary protocol? I would have said to you, good luck. There's so many clients. You're never getting anybody to go for that. And Google made it happen. So, I mean, I don't know.
That's a good point.
But it seems to me SMTP as we know it today remains kind of unfixable.
I think that is the unfortunate reality. Yeah.
All right. Well, Skylar, do you have any closing thoughts since you've been silent this whole show?
I've just been taking it in. I haven't really done a lot of email security stuff, so this has been fascinating. One thing that I hadn't heard was the quishing that you had mentioned, the QR phishing. Haven't heard that phrase before, and I know I've mentioned it before. I'm trying to coin the phrase vaping on our side because just like we've done some voice AI phishing engagements, and so I'm trying to get that to take off. Vaping.
Skylar, you will be happy to know that in my last few security awareness trainings for some of our clients, I did vaping, and I used your term.
I feel like that one could catch on a little bit more. Quishing just doesn't. It sounds gross. I feel like that's the moist word trigger for some people. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it does give a little bit of cringe. We need to figure out, we need to put an S in front of it so we can do squishing. We need to figure out if it's just security QR phishing or something.
They tried for a while with that one. I think it's kind of died out, thankfully, which is good.
Yeah.
Are they going to be able to make thrunting happen, though? That's the real question.
Nope.
Thrunting.
Nope. Not happening. I refuse.
That just, I don't know why, but thrunting just has the color brown. I don't know why. I just associate that with the color brown. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the same. That's the same thing with quishing. It has that it sounds like some sort of nasty bodily function that just you don't want to know anymore.
Yeah.
I think we better leave it there. I want to thank
Go
our
off the rails,
guests for joining us today. And I want to thank all of you for listening and putting up with this. Security Noise is a production of TrustedSec LLC. If your organization has any questions or needs regarding information security, go to www.trustedsec.com.
Everybody.